It's snowy.
Morning, Grandpa.
Good morning. How are you, sweetie?
Good.
Me too.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about travel today, your experiences traveling.
Oh man, I've done a little.
I bet. And I really know very, very little about your experiences traveling.
I've traveled to Oklahoma a few times.
Yeah, I remember that. So I guess I'll start with, what's your earliest memory of travel?
Oh, my earliest memory of travel. Wow. My father in the early 1930s still had a big old 1928 Buick. And we were living in New York City. I have no idea where he stored that big old Buick. You know, one of the big old-fashioned boxes. It even had a wooden frame. It didn't even have steel frames in those days. 1928 model. And we drove all the way from New York City to where my mother's family is in Wisconsin. And we drove. I was born on in the same bed that my mother was born in, on my grandfather's in my grandfather's farmhouse in Wisconsin. And we drove. We used to spend summers there. And so my earliest memory of travel is driving all the way to Wisconsin, and then driving at the end of the summer. My father came and got us and brought us all back to New York City where we live.
Oh, fun. So you'd go spend the summer with the grandparents?
With my grandparents.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah.
So city.
Yeah, my mother and my brother and I, we would spend the summer up in Wisconsin on the farm. It was just wonderful, yeah. But that was the first travel that I really remember. And I remember one funniest thing. I was I don't know, 4 or 5 maybe, I don't know. And I remember we had suitcases in the back seat, and I was sitting on top of the suitcases, so I was way up high. And when we came home from Wisconsin, we crossed the George Washington Bridge, which was fairly new at that time. And when you cross the George Washington Bridge from New Jersey to the New Jersey side, you can see the whole island of Manhattan down there. And I remember, and it was dusk or dark, and the lights were all on in New York City. And I remember saying to my parents, "I wonder if New York has missed me while I've been gone." They told me about that story for a long time. That's my earliest That's my earliest memory.
Around 4 or 5. That's great.
Something like that. I don't know. I was old enough to be able to talk, and that's about it. And be excited about being alive, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. Age of wonder for sure. Okay, that's a great answer.
Isn't that a great story?
It's a wonderful story. Very visual.
I wonder if New York has missed me while I've been gone.
Certainly, I would say.
I don't think so.
If you ever lived abroad, and you said when you were in the military.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about that a little bit.
I think you might have to speak up so the camera will hear your voice too a little
Okay.
bit. But I was in the military from 1949. I was 20 until the end of 1952 for 3.5 years. And the last 2.5 years of that time I spent in Japan. I was assigned to Japan and did several things there. And of course, that was an interesting thing, just flying there. When I was in the Army, they sent us I was at Fort Riley, Kansas, and they sent us to Fort Lawton, Washington, and we shipped out overseas from Fort Lawton. And in those days, they were just starting really to do what they call air packets, where they would fly commercial aircraft, commercial aircraft, fill it with military, and send them quickly over to Tokyo, Japan. And then from Tokyo, the Korean War had just started. And so they would send from Tokyo, they'd send most of the people to the front in Korea. And what they would do is they would fly people, not fly, but they put soldiers on the train from Tokyo south to Sasebo, a seaport in the south of Japan, and then ship by ship over to Korea. And very interesting story about that. Most people would come into the replacement depot, as they called it, in Tokyo, and they'd have roll call 3 times a day, in the morning, early afternoon, and at night. And you know, everybody would fall out that was there. Everybody would fall out, and they'd call names. They call Corporal so-and-so or Sergeant so-and-so or Private so-and-so, and then your serial number, military serial number, and you'd fall out. And then they'd give you your orders to get on the train and go south. And most of the people would come in there and they'd be gone in 2 days, within 2 days. Sometimes just 1 day, sometimes 3 days at the most. I was there for 2 weeks. And I couldn't figure out why am I just the roll call after roll call after roll call. I think it was, in those days, my name was considered a hard name. And I think that probably they didn't know what to do with this hard name. And I had all of these, I'd been in officer candidate school. I had learned all light weapons, and even some light artillery, and map reading and leadership training and so forth. And so, you know, I knew where I was going. I was going to the front line in Korea. And they finally, one day they called out and they said, "Okay, Corporal," they stopped. They said, "Okay, RA 152787939, fall out. You're going to APO 4087 or whatever the number, that's the address, the Army Post Office address." And it was 2 weeks. And they never did call out my name. They had to do it by serial number. They couldn't pronounce my name. And I got in the train. I thought, I'm going to Sasebo. And when we got to Kyoto, Japan, which is the ancient capital, former capital of Japan, they said, "All right, everybody in APO so-so, fall out." That was me and a couple of other guys. And we were being assigned to a military hospital in Kyoto. And I was, my MOS, military occupational specialty, which is a number, was clerk, comma, general. A general clerk. Office duty in an army hospital in Kyoto, Japan, which was a 350-bed hospital. And supposedly, that's what it was set up for. But they had 2,000 battle casualties in it. Because Kyoto was a place where they, Itami Air Base, they would fly them. Everybody that, the MASH units in Korea, MASH units were new then. Everybody that the MASH units couldn't heal and send right back to the front, they put on a plane and sent to Itami Air Base just outside of Kyoto. They came to our hospital for further healing and so forth. We saw a lot of guys die there. When they'd be brought in, they would be in such bad shape that some of them, they just would die right there. But we had military, we had annexes where all of the military guys from the front line would be bedded while they were healing. And so I was over there for 2.5 years. I had some other assignments in addition to there, but I was there for 1 year while Korea was going on. It was a very interesting time. Very interesting time.
So seeing what you saw, doing that, administrative work, basically, in the hospital.
I kept all the military, all the individual medical records for all of these guys that came in.
Thousands of people.
Job. Oh, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands, yes. In the course of a year. Yeah.
So seeing all of that, even though you had all that training and, ability to go to the front, I'm sure you were really relieved, actually.
I never handled a gun from then on. Never.
So did that kind of change your whole perspective of your military career at that point?
I'll tell you perspective that it really changed was I was very thankful.
Yeah.
Because I saw the guys that came back.
Or what came back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So I was that was the perspective that really had changed.
That was a
more than
blessing,
anything.
yeah. Even
really
though it
was.
wasn't what you planned, probably, or wasn't what you thought
Yeah.
was going to happen.
Yeah. And then I came home and found that my family had moved, where instead of being still in northeastern Ohio, in Kent, Ohio, they were in Minnesota, my parents were, in Twin Cities, because my father had taken a sabbatical from Kent State University, where he had been teaching, and he was at Minnesota, and so I took my discharge in Minnesota and picked up my college career at the University of Minnesota, and happened to meet a redhead by the name of Cherry, who is your grandmother, or was, yeah, till she left us. Yeah, so there's that travel. What's my next travel question?
Okay, it's a great story. Oh, have you traveled to the birthplace of your father?
Yes. No.
What's now?
No,
Iran?
because my father was born in Armenian community, ancient Armenian community, hundreds of years old, in what is now Iran.
Right.
What was then called Persia. And so he was born in Armenian community there, and we've never been there. But I was with my father, who had never been to Armenia. I was with my father, my brother and I went with him in 1974 to Armenia, and visited Armenia for the first time that even my father had been there. And so we were there with a group of Armenian American scholars. It was put together by some people up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that were faculty people at Harvard and MIT and a few other places up in New England. And so we went to Armenia and had a wonderful 2 weeks there in Armenia.
Do you want to talk about what you saw there or what it was like?
Poor people.
Yeah.
This is during the Armenia at that time was still one of the Soviet Union republics. It was the southernmost republic of the Soviet Union. And so it was a controlled state at that time. But the Armenian people were wonderful people. They really were just wonderful people. They all wanted to come to America. You know, they wanted to join our family and come with us and go home. They really did. But we had a wonderful time there. It's a rugged country, ancient, rugged country. And the first settlement in Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, is something like 2000 BC, the earliest settlement there. So the Armenian nation has an ancient history in that locale. We visited it's an Eastern Orthodox Church nation. Armenia is the first Christian nation.
Yeah.
Before Rome, Armenia was stated a Christian nation as a state in 301. And Rome was, I just got a new date just recently. It was corrected, the date that I used to think it was. It was 380 AD. So Armenia predates Rome by quite a long distance, quite a few years.
So even though the people there, what you saw, a lot of poverty, but pretty well educated, spoke
Very well.
Many languages.
Yeah, a lot of the space age stuff that the Soviet Union was involved with, the technology came from Armenian people there. They had a couple of space development areas there, so they were smart people.
Yeah.
Some people say they're smart-ass people, but they're pretty smart people. They always had. As a matter of fact, Armenia, the reason that my father's city in Iran, in Persia, was down there was because one of the early shahs of Persia knew that his people were poor and they were ignorant and they didn't know how to trade and they didn't know how to build anything, and they just were ignorant. And so he knew the Armenians were smart. He went up, took his army, and force-marched a whole city of Julfa from Armenia south down to his capital in Isfahan then. And he said, Armenians, your new town now is New Julfa. It's a suburb of Isfahan. He says, your new town is New Julfa. You settle there, you build my mosques, you build my palace, and you teach my people how to be good traders and be educated. So the Armenians had something to do with Persians at that time.
That's great.
That's one of the things I learned while I was there.
What are the most valuable changes in perspective that you've experienced due to all the traveling you've done? I mean, I know that's kind of a broad question, but whatever comes to mind.
Well, I think the most important thing that I've learned in traveling is that our world really is a small place. Especially with travel being as easy as it is, you can get anywhere in 24 hours. And people everywhere are great people. They have different customs, different traditions, different understandings, different tastes, different experiences, different backgrounds. But they're great everywhere. They really are. And I've come to the conclusion that people everywhere are wonderful. The leaders that we end up with don't have any common sense to keep us out of fighting each other.
Yeah, it's silly.
And the traditions everywhere are unique. In Japan, they're so different. The whole Far East is, but in Japan they were so different. And I got to really love the culture and the tradition of what the Japanese people have compared to what I grew up as a young guy here in the United States. And then later on, when my family was beginning to grow and I was working for a company that wanted to send me to Germany and so forth to buy some and check out some equipment that we needed. I got to Germany for a week or 10 days or so. And I began to realize, we're so fortunate to live in the country we live in. We have things that, even in Germany, which is highly developed, they don't have certain kinds of freedoms of expression that we do. We're just pretty wonderful, fortunate people. We don't even know it. So many people, they haven't been around the world enough. You've begun to be around the world a little bit, just so you know. People are great everywhere. And they're a pain in the ass everywhere too, especially the leaders. It's the common bond that we all share, and the problems that we share also by virtue of the failures of leadership that we have. That's one of the things that I've learned.
Yeah.
One of the most important. And everybody, every nationality, every nation, every culture has its own traditions and culture and background. And nowadays it's silly for there to be poverty anywhere. Those are some of the things I've learned.
And that, of course, goes back to what you're saying about the leaders falling short in their responsibilities.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be that way.
They sure do.
But poverty, of course, and lack of education makes people easier to control. Which
I guess
is still a motive.
Yeah. Some of us are a little bit more uncontrollable than others, but yay.
Yeah. That's a great answer to that question. What's your fondest travel memory? I'm sure you have tons, but what's something that comes to mind?
I don't have a fondest.
You don't? No.
No. The time I spent in Japan, I have some wonderfully fond memories. Enjoying the people. I really did. Enjoying the places. Nikko, which is almost a museum kind of a little old village from ancient times. Climbing Mount Fuji in Japan, which is a wonderful, wonderful treat. It was that was in 1952 that we climbed it, and it was the only clear day on Mount Fuji. We got to the top and we could see everything. And they told us it was the only clear day that they had had all year so far. And so that was a beautiful experience. Other experiences, going to Germany and getting acquainted with they are craftsmen par excellence in Germany. They are industrious people. It's part of the culture. Going to Scandinavia, they're all intelligent people, and they learn how to live in that cold climate. Going to England, and every place is different. It's becoming more and more like each other, but because of common communication bonds, which in the last century have come into play. But I don't know. I don't have any favorites.
You enjoy connecting with people and experiencing the different cultures.
Love it.
Yeah.
That's
what you like most about travel.
Love it. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
the
cool.
Scots, such great people, such warm-hearted, generous people that we met. Yeah, just great people.
Beautiful.
And going all over this country. It's not just foreign countries. It's going around in this country. You go to different parts of the country, and it's different people. You go to New England and Boston and up to Maine and so forth. People are different than they are in Florida and Mississippi and Louisiana and so forth. So much different. And we in Texans, of course, we're crazy here. Everybody else in the country thinks we are anyway. You go up to Midwest. I lived in the Midwest for a decade or so, up in the Minnesota area. A lot like Germans and Scandinavians, industrious and smart. And you go out to California, and they're so much different, relaxed, and make a lot of money. We in this country are so different all over the country too. Mountain people, go to the Appalachians, go to the Rockies, totally different. The people are. Yeah. It's, even with television, the same television all over this country, there are still differences between people.
Thank goodness, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Have you ever traveled alone? Like not with a group, not with the military, not with family, just you? Have you done some solo trips ever? Just curious.
Yeah, well I consider, as far as family and friends are concerned, I consider the U.S. Army travel pretty much alone. You're alone in the middle of a bunch of people. But yeah, in 1968, the company I was working for, a film company, sent me to Germany. The time I went to Germany, I was sent there alone. I'd never done European travel by myself, and never been to Europe, as a matter of fact. And so that was my first time to travel overseas alone. People seem to do it much more relaxed and take it for granted nowadays. But for me, it was quite a new experience. It really was. But except for that time, I don't think I've ever traveled alone ever anywhere. Your grandmother and I have traveled together a lot, and went to Scotland and England once with two other men that we were checking out sites for one of our choir trips there. So that doesn't really count, even though there was no family alone. But no, I think that's the only time I really traveled alone.
Did you feel lonely, or did you have more of a freedom from traveling alone, or what was your experience with that?
Well, I was busy.
Yeah, because you were on
I was busy, and I had specific tasks to execute, and doing research on equipment and the manufacturers of it and so forth, and the people that made it. So I was pretty busy, but when I pretty much got done with it, I remember my boss, he phoned me, and in my hotel, and he said, it was before cell phones, and he said, hey, take a few days and enjoy yourself, have some fun. I got lonely.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think 2 or 3 days, 3 or 4 days later, I was on a plane and I came home.
Yeah.
So I didn't even take advantage of that.
Totally different. Traveling with all your children, Carpetyan kids. What are some memories that come to mind?
Oh, gee. Well, you know, the family really, as far as growing up years are concerned, my children really grew up when we were living in Dallas. In Texas primarily, but especially in Dallas. Those were the growing up years for our family. And we did travel together. We traveled, it was interesting. We had, I think in the course of our lives together, we had 3 VW buses, which, you know, seemed like for us a very practical vehicle. For a whole family. We went to Colorado. We had friends who had space in Colorado. We had friends who had property in Colorado, and we'd go up and we'd stay there and spend. That happened in the summertime a few times, but it also happened just after Christmas. I was working in a church, and sometimes the toughest time to get away is in normal weeks and months, but right after Christmas was often the first time that I could get away from the church work, and so the family would often pack up and load up and drive to Colorado, and we'd spend time up in the mountains in the wintertime for a few, I remember 3 or 4 wintertime vacations for a couple of weeks. We also went to Big Bend. We went to Big Bend a couple of times as a family. And then there was one time that we went to, we had bought, we had one of the big Ford Country Squire wagons that we had bought from some friends of ours, used one. And we had a trailer hitch in the back of it, and we bought ourselves one of these pop-up camper trailers that would sleep 6. And we towed that thing from Dallas to Canada. We went up through Indiana and saw your grandmother's sister and family, and then we went up to Toronto and upstate Ontario, and then over to Quebec, and towed that trailer and came back down through New York and saw my brother and his family, and then eventually got home. I think that was the first time we took a 3-week vacation, and I learned what it was to instead of taking a few days here and a few days there for vacation. That was the first time I realized that if you take a long vacation, you're just unwinding the first week. The second week, you're beginning to realize, hey, you're on vacation. The third week, you really are on vacation. And so that was an interesting experience about getting away and taking vacation time. But that's the kind of family travel that we did. And, you know, packing up into a little vehicle as a family, young family, that was quite an experience. We had mostly a good time. Very good time.
Nice.
My memories are good. So there was the usual fighting in the back seat. Who cares?
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
normal.
those memories are long. Those memories are dead. The laughter and the fun, they still live on.
That's awesome.
That answer that question? I don't know. Yeah, that just about covers it. That really just about covers it.
That's great. What do you appreciate most about coming home after traveling?
Always coming home, especially from overseas, always appreciating the kind of life, the freedom of life that we really have in this country compared with so many parts of the world. where there is cultural restrictions, if not legal restrictions, but certainly cultural restrictions of one sort or another. And we don't have them. We can be whatever we want to be in this country. That's not true in so many places in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's what really comes to mind more than anything else.
Nice.
You've got good questions here, lady.
Thank you.
You really do.
You've got great answers. It makes it fun to ask the
It's a
questions.
long life.
Right? Do you want to share like I don't know, I know for me traveling, I have like anecdotes here and there of like cultural, like faux pas, you know, where you learn then from being in different cultures and maybe, do you have a funny story? Something that's, you know, I don't know. I mean, you're so good at dealing with people, maybe you never made a mistake like that. Like just, you know, being in a different place, not knowing, just trying to, like, for laughs maybe, something that...
You know, I cannot think of any experiences, certainly off the top of my head, that were in the category of a faux pas of any kind culturally. I just cannot remember any. I'm sure I made plenty. Usually unawares because I was stupid enough not to know.
Yeah.
Probably. I'm sure, I'm absolutely certain of this, that when I was in Japan, I know darn well, and I was just barely in my 20s, and I know darn well that I had to have made some cultural faux pas. I know perfectly well that I had to, and I was military at that, and it was, by the way, I wasn't only military in Japan, but those were the times, those were the years, the early part of my time there were the years when Japan was still what we call under the occupation. We were occupiers, we were conquerors of Japan, and the peace treaty, which let them be themselves again, did not come until the last few months, April 15th, 1952, as a matter of fact. The occupation ended. And boy, what a difference in the Japanese people
Just immediately.
that day, immediately. Because in the Oriental culture, certainly the Japanese Far Eastern culture, there's an awful lot of obsequiousness. You know, they're conquered people. And you sense that they were a conquered people. They lost. And their culture, that's a shame kind of a thing. And you were aware of that. Even though I was the kind of a guy when I met a family, and I did, met a family or individuals, I wanted to be, we're equals. But there was still always, just culturally, in the general citizenry of Japan, there was always a sense that you were conquerors in the house, in the country of a conquered people. And boy, did that change overnight. And I'm sure, culturally, I had to have made some mistakes in terms of the cultures are so different.
So what did, after what sovereignty basically for them,
What?
for them in 1952, you're saying the difference, what was the difference that you saw in the people? They just
Opened up all of a sudden,
up.
and we're not conquered people anymore. We're free. You're our equal.
Wow.
You know. Oh yeah, it was, you sensed it that day. It was one of those things we all remarked, all of us in the military over there, we all remarked about it, how culturally, how the change in everybody happened instantly. It was like a coming to this point, and then all of a sudden it was different from that, literally from that point, that
And then
day
did
on.
it change for you guys? Did you feel more like a guest then maybe than...
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're in
Yeah.
in our country. But, you know, we knew that we were in their country instead of we being the conquerors of them, over them. It was an immediate change right away. And of course we have seen the ability of the Japanese people to do all sorts of conquering of their own in terms of technology and business acumen and manufacturing skills and so forth. In my younger days, something that was made in Japan was about as cheap and useless and worthless as it could possibly be. Little trinket toys made in Japan. They were famous in this country for that, like China was for so long. In your years, and then from that time on, things began to change quickly, and they became very quickly their own power. They really did.
That's a beautiful thing to witness.
Well, it was such a marked change. It was such a marked change. When I was a kid growing up in New York City, little trinket toys were made in Japan. Useless, worthless things.
And then the sense of pride changed, and like the quality that they produced changed.
Now you got to pay a lot of money for a Lexus.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
So it seems like all of your stories, just you were in all these different places in these really interesting times. Some of these places were maybe not always the safest place to travel to in the time that you were there, but with your spiritual connection, obviously you always felt, seems like, safe. You went to Mount Fuji on the one clear day. You've always been kind of accompanied by this protection, it seems like.
Well, I've been certainly aware of what's around me. I certainly have been very well aware of what's around me while I travel, pretty much. It's hard not to be, if you have any sensitivity at all, You got to be pretty dumb not to recognize both the beauty as well as the differences of a different place. I remember one travel story that was extraordinary. You were asking that a few minutes ago. I don't know how I ever pulled it off. I really don't. We're used nowadays to getting in a car, and we have fabulous roads, highways everywhere, overcrowded, but we've got them. Well, the same thing is also true in Japan. It used to be that, like it was in this country, when you wanted to travel someplace, okay, you wanted to go from New York to Wisconsin like we did when we were kids, old two-lane narrow highway. That's all there was. And they weren't really necessarily highways. There were little roads going through lots of little towns. When I was in Japan, and it was in the last year that I was there, and I was working for the Armed Forces Radio Service, radio station in what we call the Far East Network, that was in Osaka, Japan, in the central part of the main island. And the captain, I think he was the captain who was in charge of that radio station, Far East Network radio station, he had to go to Tokyo, and he was going there for a period of time, I recall, and he was going up in the train. He wanted his car, 1941 Ford, I remember. He wanted his car while he was in Tokyo. He wanted me. He asked me, "Are you willing to drive this car? And I'll give you instructions. You can drive it and get it to me in Tokyo, and I'll put you on a train. You can come back to Osaka and come back to." I said yes. I don't know how, in God's name, I survived. It was a nighttime trip too, and I don't know why. I traveled, took that car from Osaka to Tokyo, I don't know, something like 400 miles, maybe 300, 400 miles. And I don't know how I traveled roads that I'd never been on.
In the dark?
Ever. Mostly in the dark. And drove it to Tokyo, found the guy, delivered it to him, he put me on a train. I don't know how I did that. Honestly don't. I've tried to recall and get my memory banks around how that trip went. how do I get through all those little tiny towns you have to drive through on these little tiny Japanese roads in those days? Now they've got superhighways, and fast trains, but just little tiny roads. How did I do that? I haven't a clue how I did that, but I did it. The things, the things you somehow or other survive when you are relatively a kid.
Yeah.
21, I think I was, or 22, barely. 21, 22, something like that. Amazing. I've thought of that so often, wondering how the heck did I do this? That's the only crazy thing that I can remember.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. I survived, and by the way, my memory is that it was still an occupation time. I could have been a pretty good victim.
Yeah, absolutely. In your big Ford.
In my big American Ford. Exactly.
Wow.
And boy, the tin box cars that Japan had in those days. Boy. Amazing.
Yeah.
Next question.
I'm out of questions.
You're out of questions?
I'm out of questions.
Well,
Is there anything that you can think of that you want to talk about?
one of the things that I've got to do is to make a list, just for my own information, of all the places I've been in the world. Becky and I both travel a lot. She has traveled in her work a lot, and I've traveled a lot, and especially since we moved to Houston. Your grandmother and I had the opportunity to travel more than ever before, just by virtue of our circumstances and our time in life and so forth. And it's occurred to me to wonder all the different places I've been, and how many countries that I've been in, or been across or through. I've been in Russia, I've been in Finland, I've been in Norway, I've been in Sweden, I've been in Denmark, I've been in Estonia, Germany. It's a long list. How many states have I think there are only about 2 or 3 states that I've not been in yet. And that's on Idaho and maybe Wyoming, and I think that's it. Yeah. So it's just kind of interesting to think about all the places that I've been that I don't even remember anymore. What you got?
Well, I have a starred question here.
A starred question?
I think that's the one I'm supposed to ask first. Something about a trip between Hungary and Prague on the train.
Oh, that famous trip. I remember it. Becky was with us. Your grandmother and Becky and I. Becky was president of the choir in Houston, and Becky and as president, and your grandmother and I, and a travel company representative from England. The 4 of us were traveling in Czech Republic, because Czechoslovakia had separated, and Czech and Slovakia were now 2 separate countries, which is part of the story. And we were traveling to check out sites, different places for the choir to stay in terms of hotels and so forth, but also churches and places to sing, to do our concerts on a trip that we were planning in Hungary and Czech Republic. And we were traveling, I'm really confused which direction we're going. Becky is very certain of it, and I don't know for sure which it was. Anyway, it was either from Hungary, Budapest, to Prague, Czechoslovakia, or the other way around. It really doesn't make any difference for the story. But we had to, on the train, go through a little corner of what now was separate in Slovakia. Now, Hungary and Czech Republic and Czechoslovakia, when Slovakia was still part of it, were all at one point part of the Eastern Bloc countries that were under the influence and controlled by the Soviet Union at a time. The Soviet Union was over, but there were still cultural and governmental changes that had been made or had not been made. Hungary was very much in the Western connection camp, and so was the Czech Republic. But Slovakia was still more in the Soviet camp as far as administration is concerned. So we crossed the border into Slovakia, and of course, when you're on a train going through countries, people from control people from one country will come on the train and check your passports and so forth, and your visas if it was required. We didn't require a visa in Czech Republic or Hungary, as I recall, but it was a different matter in Slovakia. Your grandmother traveled on a Canadian passport, and it had to do with the fact that she never bothered to firm up the fact that she was a U.S. citizen. So, and it was convenient for her. She still had her Canadian passport, which was easy to get for her because she was born there. And we traveled through into Slovakia, and before we came out of Slovakia into whichever it was, Hungary or Czech Republic, the Slovakia military control, border control people came on with their Uzis or whatever their
automatic
guns were.
weapons.
Yeah, they were automatic weapons, that's for sure. And they came on board, saw our passports, and the British gal, no problem, because they had relations already. Britain and Czech Republic already had relations. Those of us on U.S. passports, no problem. Becky and I. Canada had not, and Canada and Slovakia had not yet developed relations. And nobody had told us that Cherry had to have, your grandmother had to have a visa for travel, even just through that little corner of Slovakia. And so they said, you come off the train. And we pulled into the station right on the border, and they took us up when, the catwalk that that goes over all the many tracks in a big railroad station. Had to go up there and then go across to a building and go into the second story where it just went right in. And they said she had to go off. Well, we weren't going to just let her get off and we stay on.
Obviously.
So we all got off and went in there, and people go in and out, locked doors, in and out, back and forth. And then finally they called her into the inside office. And we didn't know what's going on all this time. And what it turned out was she finally came out, and she had to pay, and our travel person took care of it, she had to pay for a visa to cross. And then that was taken care of. We were going back across and then down to the track to get back in the train, and just as we were going across, before we started coming down the stairs to get on the platform, the train pulled out without us. I was just furious, and here's this guy with this automatic thing right behind us. I turned around and in my anger just chewed the living hell out of him, and he could have just said,
Yeah.
I suppose, I don't know, it would have been a border incident, but who would have he cared? What would he have cared, But it was a frightening moment, because it was we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't really understand what was going on. They don't speak our language,
Right.
Not worth a flip. So that's that story, and it was a tough moment in us. There's a little bit more to it, because we had to wait then for the next train in the darkest little room with benches around the edge, and a single light bulb hanging.
It's like a movie.
And then there's a sort of a cafeteria room next to it, which had a television, little tiny television, color. It was the only color in the whole blinkety blank place. It was about as dark and black and gray that the whole place was. And then all of a sudden a whistle blew. It was 5 o'clock, quitting time with some factory or other. These guys all in black would come out and their lunch pails. They come in, there's this ring of chairs around this television set. They come sit down. No smiles, no talk, no thing. American sitcom on the television. And they just sat and watched it. Then eventually I think they left and went home. We ate something, I think some sort of borscht or something that we ended up eating, and we weren't sure that we were eating anything that was safe at all. It was a crazy, kind of scary time.
That's a very surreal
experience.
Was.
Did you see Schindler's List?
Yeah.
Remember how dark it was? How everything was? It was a Schindler's List scene and place. It really was. That's exactly what it was. Crazy.
Very different from all your other travel experiences.
A little bit. Yeah. Vastly different. What else you got on that list?
Do you remember your first impressions of Texas and Tennessee and how different these impressions were from your later experiences?
From
I guess.
Our later experience? Well, we moved to Tennessee from Minnesota.
Okay.
I was born and raised, after I was born, I was raised in New York City. I was educated in New York or New York schools or in Massachusetts. I graduated from Massachusetts prep school. Started college in Kent, Ohio, northeastern Ohio. And then after the military, in Minnesota, University of Minnesota, where I ended up getting my bachelor's degree. But moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we were moved onto a place on Lookout Mountain, which is a mountain overlooking Chattanooga, a little town, and this was our first experience as a family in the South. And there were remnants, even in our backyard, of Civil War battlements and so forth. There was trenches and so forth back there. And so we were Yankees in Southern land, and we were made, especially your Uncle Pete, he was really made to feel Yankee boy. It was a culture change. And your grandmother put her foot in her mouth a number of times with some of her lady friends in Chattanooga about this or that. Crystal hamburgers, I remember she made fun of once. And you don't do that in the South, if you come, especially if you don't have a Southern accent. That was a culture change in this country. We're talking about cultures around the world, well, even in this country. It was a huge cultural change. And then, of course, Texas, where everything is supposedly bigger. That's a pretty good example in our own lives of the depth and breadth of cultural differences right here in the United States.
Yeah. Even now, I would say that's a considerable difference.
Yeah. Huge difference. And then here you are out in, let's talk about culture difference, in Hawaii.
Yeah, very different.
And especially in the island where you are.
I'm in the most remote island.
Beautiful place.
It's beautiful.
Beautiful place. I was there once.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
You're welcome to come visit anytime. I have an extra bedroom, so if you guys are
we sang a concert. It was while I was doing my doctoral work at UT, and there was a singing group that I was a part of, and we did a tour in Hawaii for about 10 days, I think, a week, 10 days, and on several of the islands, and that was one of them.
What was your impression of the islands? When was this?
1978.
So, let's see, less than 20 years since, not quite 20 years after they became a state.
That's right.
1959.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, still new, still fresh.
That's right. That's right.
Wow, what a time to be there.
Yeah, they've been a state for now, what, half a century?
Well, 1959.
Yeah.
Even now.
Almost, yeah.
It still feels fresh sometimes.
Yeah, it's beautiful place. I must say, Kauai, that beach, I'll never forget it. That great big bay and where the
Hanalei,
hotels
I'm
are.
assuming, maybe.
Just,
Hanalei, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't remember. But beautiful. Just so beautiful.
Yeah. It's a pretty wonderful place.
Yeah, it is.
I'm very lucky. Okay, so do you remember the pogo stick and other memorabilia from Japan, and what does that represent?
Pogo stick. No, it wasn't a pogo stick. It was a Fuji stick. When you climb Mount Fuji, they give you an octagonal shaped pole, and as you go up the mountain, there are these little stations, and they have little hibachi charcoal fire pots, and they have a little branding iron on each one of the stations, and this is the way you prove that you got to the top of Mount Fuji. And you, when you are on your way up, you they'll put this little brand from each of these little stations as you climb up to the top. They'll put on it, and I had it in our house in Dallas. And the guys, when they were growing up, I don't know, they needed a pole for something or other. They cut it all up. So I don't have my Fuji stick anymore.
Your Fuji pogo stick?
My pogo stick. There was no pogo stick.
Maybe that's what they used it for.
Yeah, I don't know, something like that. So I lost that. I wasn't a very happy father at that time.
Oh, I bet.
I seem to remember, but you know, it is what it is. You lose something, it's gone. I remember I had to have been very angry about that, because that was really pretty important memory. It's important because just to get to the top of Mount Fuji, 12,300 and some odd feet to begin with, is an accomplishment, and the fact that I had the proof of it, you know. Climbed it with a colonel and his daughter.
Wow.
From Denton, Texas. Yeah. That were over there.
What a wonderful bunch of memories you have.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of memories. I take them for granted too. You know, I have so many memories that you can't remember and treasure every single one of them individually. You just can't remember them.
Well, it kind of, your life just kind of flows into this. I'm amazed that you remember dates and times so well. That blows my mind. I'm only 33 and it's all a mishmash.
Yeah. But you know, we've all been living, and nowadays, here I am. Next week, I think it is 86, and you get a chance to live a lot of life. Take it for granted, especially when at 86 you're still living and still doing what you love to do, and you don't think much of the past. I really don't stop and, oh, the past was wonderful. I don't go there.
Does this project kind of, is it bringing all that back and kind of giving you more of an appreciation of the...
It makes me stop and think about the past. So I've thought of things today from our conversation that I haven't thought about for a long time. I haven't thought about that trip to driving to Tokyo from Kyoto. I haven't thought about that for years. You know? I haven't thought about the Fuji stick. Pogo stick. I haven't thought about the Fuji stick for years. It's been a long time.
I remember going to Colorado with the family when I was young, and I didn't remember that. I had completely forgotten about that until you said it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was probably, 5. I remember getting gum stuck in my hair, and Aunt Julie told us to put peanut butter in it, and there were many other times that I had gum
stuck in your hair?
And I had chewing gum in my hair probably another dozen times as a young kid, and we always went back to putting peanut butter in it to get it out, and I had totally forgotten about that. That's what I remember.
And it works.
Yeah, it works. Well, oil, any kind of oil, but yeah, I don't know, peanut butter.
Peanut butter's got oil?
Yeah.
Yeah. Got anything else there?
I don't.
Well, what can we think about? Gee, what can we think about? I suppose one of the things we can think about is what's the most beautiful place in the world that I've traveled to.
Oh, yeah.
I can't answer that question for myself even, that I can think of. there's so many beautiful places. There's so many. I can think of some beautiful places in Scotland that are just unique to Scotland. In Hawaii, that are unique to Hawaiian Islands. I remember going over one of the, we were in of course a bus for the choir that was traveling there. I remember being in the dry side of a mountain on a highway, and it was part of the lava area of one of the islands where there was a lot of dry and obviously not much of any rain. And we literally went over this mountain and then down on the other. So as soon as you got to the other side, rain,
Misty,
wet,
green.
green. Everything was like all of a sudden we're in two different countries. It was incredible. But there's so many beautiful places all over the world. And then you go to Germany and Europe and France and so forth, and ancient things. And here we are. We're a country that isn't even as old as some of the buildings you go to in Europe.
That's true.